August 1945. The guns of World War II have only just fallen silent. Cities lie in ruins. Millions are displaced. Europe is broken, but also on the edge of something new. In our history, Europe struggled to rebuild. The Marshall Plan poured in aid. The European Union slowly emerged. Peace, though fragile, took hold. But imagine a different path. Imagine that instead of uniting, Europe split. Not into many small nations, but into two colossal superpowers, two rival blocs, each determined to dominate the continent. What if Europe divided into two parts and went to war? The idea alone is staggering. Europe is home to more than 40 nations, hundreds of millions of people, and some of the most advanced military and industrial systems in the world. If divided into two great alliances, the continent would become a battlefield unlike any other. But to understand the scale of this scenario, we must first define the split. Let us imagine that in the aftermath of World War II, Europe fractures not along east-west lines of the Cold War, but along its own internal divisions. Perhaps one bloc is built around Germany, rising quickly from the ashes of defeat. The other gathers around Britain and France, determined never again to allow a single power to dominate the continent. Two Europes, two armies, two economies, each bristling with weapons, each convinced survival depends on destroying the other. What would such a war look like? First, the geography. Europe is dense, interconnected, and small compared to other continents. Borders lie close. Capital cities are only hours apart by modern travel. This means any conflict would be immediate, fast, and devastating. There would be no distant fronts, no oceans to cross. War would come directly to the heart of every nation. The weapons would be formidable. Tanks rolling through the plains of Poland and France. Jet fighters streaking across the skies of Germany and Italy. Naval fleets dueling in the Mediterranean and North Sea. And behind it all, the shadow of nuclear weapons, sitting in arsenals, waiting for the moment when desperation turns into annihilation. But let us step into the timeline. The war begins with a spark, perhaps a border incident in Central Europe, a clash over resources in the Balkans, or simply the rising fear that if one bloc does not strike first, the other surely will. Within days, mobilizations begin. Armies mass along frontiers. Satellites track troop movements. Fighter squadrons circle overhead. The first phase would be shock and awe. Both sides would attempt lightning strikes, seizing key rail hubs, airports, and industrial centers. Missiles would rain down on enemy capitals. Cyber attacks, an unseen weapon of the digital age, would cripple communications and power grids. The goal, paralyze the enemy before they can react. Yet Europe's geography would make this nearly impossible. There is no empty space to absorb blows. Every strike would hit cities, infrastructure, and civilians. From Paris to Berlin, Warsaw to Rome, war would be total from the very first day. The second phase, ground war. Here, tanks and mechanized infantry would dominate. Imagine modern armored divisions, Leopard 2s, Leclercs, Challenger 2s, smashing into each other on the fields of Central Europe. Entire towns would become fortresses. Rivers like the Rhine and Danube would turn into natural front lines, fought over again and again. Air power would be decisive. Stealth fighters like the F-35, Eurofighter Typhoons, and advanced drones would patrol the skies. Air superiority would mean survival. Without it, supply convoys would be destroyed, cities reduced to rubble, and ground forces cut off. The Mediterranean would ignite as well. Fleets from Italy, France, Spain, and Britain would clash with submarines and carrier groups from the opposing bloc. Trade routes through the Strait of Gibraltar could be shut down, strangling economies. But the true nightmare would be escalation. Europe is armed not just with conventional weapons, but with nuclear arsenals. Britain and France already hold them. In a divided continent, Germany, Poland, and others might develop their own. The logic of deterrence, so familiar in the Cold War, would hang over every decision. If one side begins to lose badly, would they resort to nuclear fire? A single strike on a capital like Berlin or London could kill millions in minutes. Retaliation would be certain. Within hours, the continent could become a wasteland of radioactive ruins. And here lies the paradox. The very existence of such weapons might prevent full-scale war. Leaders would know that victory is impossible, that the cost would be the end of civilization. But human history is filled with miscalculations. One mistake, one misread radar signal, one panicked order could trigger catastrophe. The consequences would go beyond the battlefield. Economically, a divided Europe at war would collapse the global system. Europe is one of the largest trading regions on Earth. Its industries supply cars, electronics, medicine, and energy to the entire planet. War would shatter supply chains. Oil from the Middle East, gas from Russia, and goods from Asia would have nowhere to go. Prices would skyrocket. Recession would spread worldwide. Socially, the impact would be devastating. Refugees by the tens of millions would flee destroyed cities. Borders would close. Ancient cultural ties would snap under the weight of suspicion and fear. Neighbors would become enemies. And politically, the rest of the world would be drawn in. The United States could not stand aside. Nor could Russia, watching its western frontier ignite. China, too, would see opportunity in Europe's distraction. What begins as a European war could quickly become a global war, a third world war, in all but name. But let us step back. Is such a future truly possible? Could Europe really tear itself apart once more? In our history, the continent has already seen 2 world wars. Both were fought for dominance. Both ended in devastation. And both convinced later generations that unity was the only way forward. The European Union, for all its flaws, was built on the promise of peace, that trade, diplomacy, and cooperation would make war unthinkable. Yet history shows us that nothing is permanent. Alliances shift, economies strain, nationalism rises, and in times of crisis, the old patterns of rivalry can return. A Europe divided into 2 superpowers would be one of the most dangerous places on Earth. Advanced technology, dense populations, and centuries of tension would combine into a powder keg waiting for a spark. So, what if Europe divided into 2 parts and went to war? The answer is grim. Cities reduced to rubble, millions dead or displaced. A continent shattered, perhaps forever, and the shock waves would spread worldwide, reshaping the global balance of power for generations. But perhaps the bigger lesson is this. Europe's greatest strength has never been its armies or its weapons. It has been its ability to learn from the past. Twice in the 20th century, the continent nearly destroyed itself. Twice it clawed its way back from the edge. The question now is simple. If faced with division once more, would Europe choose war? Or would it remember the price already paid in blood and ruin? And that leaves us with one final thought. If this is what happens when Europe turns against itself, what other futures might lie in wait if history takes a different path? What if Asia divided into rival empires once more? What if Africa united under a single power? What if technology pushed humanity into conflicts it cannot control? The answers, as always, lie in the shadows of what if.